Recovery is stupendous.
Achievable.
Hope.
Freedom.
Freedom.
Empowering.
It's unique to everyone.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Getting a new lease on life.
It's finding restoration after you fall down.
Recovery is having the freedom to enjoy life.
For me, it was finding a way to really love myself.
My recovery is possible in part because of my own sense of purpose.
Hello, and welcome to another segment of Controversial Conversations brought to you by Montana's Peer Network. My name is Amanda Walton. I am a peer service coordinator. And today I am joined by...
Hey, my name is Brent Morris. I'm also a peer services coordinator here at Montana's Peer Network.
Today's topic is drug decriminalization. The views expressed today do not represent Montana's Peer Network, MPN staff, or affiliates. The purpose of this and all controversial conversation segments is to facilitate thought, conversation, and healthy discussion of controversial topics that may impact behavioral health workers, consumers, and the recovery movement in general. So with that, let's go ahead and just jump right on in. Brent, what are your thoughts surrounding drug decriminalization?
So one of the first points I feel, there's not the point of being against the law. Those that aren't already users or have used, it'll encourage some people experimenting, more curiosity, and then some people with pre-existing health issues might not even understand what the drugs would do beyond the addiction, just some of the effects of the substance. That's one of the concerns I have.
So for me, I'm going to give some information in contrast to that, and I can understand that thought process, but my thinking goes back to how drug use and our drug problem has only increased, right? So the laws that are currently in place are obviously not preventing anything. Drug-related offenses in the US are at an all-time high, so higher than they have ever been before. And also the mindset and thought process that if drugs weren't forbidden, there would not be such a high underground market for them. So we've created our own need for the underground market world by criminalizing a personal choice. So, the belief that criminalizing a behavior will eliminate a problem is a culturally and societally conditioned perspective that may not be as accurate as we hoped it would be, right? What happens when we are youth and we're told repeatedly not to do something? Often out of that natural curiosity that you were talking about, Brent, the forbidden behaviors, the stuff that we're told is taboo, no, you can't do it. Often we secretly seek them out, and that results in us developing unhealthy behaviors such as addiction and various other unhealthy behaviors that perpetuate and are demonstrated as in adulthood. To me, this is a public health and education problem, not a criminal problem.
Well, I see, us not doing it out of spite because of it's a taboo, less of us may try it, right?
Right. If it's not such a stigmatizing, taboo experience or choice, then there's that risk-taking behavior that often starts developing in our teenage years that won't necessarily seek that out as much because it's not something that, it's something that everybody's dealing with. People are going to public health facilities and harm reduction programs to work towards fixing the problem, and it becomes a societally accepted, a culturally accepted experience and part of life instead of something that we reject and push away and punish and criminalize. Does that make sense?
Well, and that's I see your point. It kind of supports my first comment too. So by not having it wrong and not having it a punishable crime, then there'll be that much more people trying it, to where before it was a crime and there were still people using it, still people illegally using it, but now it'll be how many times that number because of it's okay. And something else I want to bring up too, you mentioned the market. You know, when it is decriminalized, the demand will increase also because will be more people trying it. But then the price will probably go down because it'll create a business. So when the price goes down, again, those that were holding back because of it was a crime and the cost was higher, you know, my concern is there'll be that many more people trying it. And you know, the experimentation is one thing, but some of the drugs that is looking at decriminalizing the meth and heroin, I don't know, process or time is so short, you know, one time or two times that they're addicted. So that's why I'm concerned. Just that example, the not a crime, the lower cost will lead to more people becoming addicts.
That is actually a very conventional perspective. It's viewed as a problem, so let's criminalize the problem. Let's create additional social unrest. Let's create more barriers. Let's create more stigma, internalized and social. Let's create situations where parents are torn apart from their families instead of facilitating, keeping them together, and promoting healing by rejecting the very behavior that we do not understand it and we're afraid of, right? And that's what's happened. Since the drug war began in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, we have seen nothing but profound increase. The levels of people incarcerated in our jails and prisons, federal, state, and local, is over 50% of our prison population. Those are people who could be typically productive parents and out in the society, helping our culture, you know, helping our economy, helping their children. And yes, while I understand that it is a behavior that can result in other choices that are criminal in nature, should it not be those behaviors that are addressed from a criminal perspective, while the drug use is addressed from a public health perspective and people are able to receive treatment? You know, like I said previously, to me, it is very much a public health and education problem that we have decriminalized. And our thought process, we seem to not be able to wrap our minds around, even though, so for every action, every force, for everything that happens, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And the statistics show that as we criminalize more and more and we try to come down harder more and more on this specific thing, the numbers are getting proportionately higher. So what about if what would happen if we take Newton's third law of motion, what I just mentioned, right? That's a physics concept, but it's concept in reality too. It's about energy, right? That for every action, for every rule, there is an opposite and equal reaction. So if we move towards accepting rather than rejecting substance use as a natural part of life and life experience, no, not everybody is going to use it, but or to use substances of any kind, but I can guarantee you that each of us is impacted at some point in our lives by substances. If we accept it rather than reject it, we're able to work through it and move past it, then rather than becoming imprisoned by this ongoing social, cultural, massive concern. You know, there's a reason why the US is the most highly incarcerated nation in the world, having more numbers of people in jail and prisons specifically related to drug abuse than any other country. And we are not the most populated country, right?
Well, that brings up a great point. And you mentioned that, you know, prisons and different things and the, you know, the country of our side of the country and stuff, and the rate of people imprisoned, that's hard to fight, you know. So if we're saving money in the jails and prisons and through the criminal courts, but then having through public health and not as stigmatizing asking for help as before, what's going to happen to the counseling, therapy, and treatment for addiction? Will our infrastructure be ready for that? How will the cost, and this is a question, how will the increase in cost in treatment and therapy and counseling butt up against the money saved from the courts and prisons and jails?
Right. So there are millions of dollars spent every year on incarcerating or on incarceration, right? So in diverting those millions of dollars in each state, possibly billions on a federal level, saved by having lower incarceration levels, so less people incarcerated, and draw from the revenue generated by legal drug sales. So for instance, Oregon, Colorado, now even in Montana, we have an opportunity to have revenue from the marijuana, legal sale of marijuana for recreational use, right? And those funds, that revenue can be used to fund public health efforts and initiatives, harm reduction programs, et cetera, that will actually be beneficial to our communities, our homes, our people that are struggling with substance use and mental health, right?
So you feel the money saved through the courts and prisons and jails, and if it is taxed or cost per sale, you feel that the need for public health will be less. So in turn, it'll save money in long run.
Absolutely. I believe it will absolutely save money in the long run, and we'll actually start seeing people recover. We'll see people healing from the things that have held them back, because when we criminalize, we keep people stuck in that cycle because they feel like they're a failure. They are judged. They're not able to get as good of jobs. They're not able to go to school. And it's not necessarily something that should be a criminalized behavior, right? It's more of a moral choice and a health impacting choice. And while when in excess, it can cause the onset of other health issues, drug-related spread of illness, involvement with law enforcement for other reasons, we can treat it like it's a public health problem and work together as a culture to help alleviate that problem, instead of, oh, you better not ever do this, because if you do this, then you're going to go to jail and the rest of your life is going to be ruined. Because even when you're out on probation, if you have one dirty UA, then you're in violation and you're going to go right back. It just keeps taking people out of the communities and out of the culture and keeps rejecting over and over and over and over and over again. It's a process that is destructive. And I think we're seeing that in our culture. And if something hasn't been working, then maybe we need to think outside of the box and implement some non-conventional approaches. So with that, I'm actually going to bring up Portugal. Portugal used to have the highest per capita rates of substance use, drug addiction, overdose-related deaths, as well as drug-related spread of illness such as HIV and hepatitis C. And they used to follow the same mindset. They criminalized, right? And in, goodness, about 10 years ago, they started changing the way that they approached it. Right now, there's a handful of countries. Portugal is one of them. So there's Portugal, Czechia, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. They have decriminalized drug use and personal use possession. So, I'm not talking about decriminalizing if you have somebody that comes in with a whole bunch of drugs that they're obviously going to distribute. But majority of people who are incarcerated for drugs are incarcerated for personal possession, right? And when that is decriminalized, we're saying, hey, we're not gonna make your life worse because this is your current experience. We're gonna educate. We're gonna facilitate harm reduction, places where you can go to exchange. If somebody is an IV user, get clean materials and eliminate the dirty ones that are currently being housed in homes and trash cans and up in shelves. That's where the real harm lies too, with the drugs. It's just people don't want to go to places where there might be harm reduction available because, for instance, they have picketers outside reminding them how bad they are. They go in if they're currently under the influence. Law enforcement could be called and they could be taken away. It's the perception.
Well, that's you touched on some things just in this last couple sentences, with the safe administration, through those different things. But if a portion of the people using do not go to the safe centers or safe places, and then there's going to be needles on the ground, needles in a park, in a playground, or somewhere unexpected for someone to be cleaned up or watched, and a child is injured, there's other things. And then, like alcohol, driving under the substance, under the influence, people will use and either leave a safe center or safe place and then drive.
So to me, this goes back to the whole the cultural perception, right? So safe centers, we're talking about harm reduction programs, the places where people go to get help to maintain safety, that are actually surrounded by picketers and rioters and all kinds of signs against drugs, reminding them of how bad they are, how much of a failure they are for using in the first place. Those are the places we're talking about, right? So of course, people are going to choose to use in private and typically unsafe locations surrounded by like-minded individuals, because that's exactly where they feel like they're accepted. That's where that population is, where they feel, they're not going to they're not going to judge me for my use because they're just like me, right? And the reality is, we all have vices. We all have things that we can recover from. So we all have things that we need to overcome and rise above so that we can move forward in our lives, right? The presence of these safe centers where people can go and can choose to exchange and dispose of used drug paraphernalia, it is more safe than people using in the streets, right? But until the social stigma and the judgmental perspective that is common in our culture is eliminated and changed, they won't be utilized. At least not to the extent that our goal is to have them utilized, right? Nobody wants to go in for help and end up being arrested. Nobody wants to go in for help and end up being judged when they're standing outside the building. It's the approach.
So you don't have any fear of your children being in disease or anything?
I have more fear of my children becoming involved now and hiding it because they're afraid of judgment and retribution and being rejected, because that's when that unsafe behavior happens.
This example, alcohol for many years, marijuana is moving across the nation recreationally legalized. In Montana, it'll start sale in, I believe, January 22. But some of the drugs are looking at decriminalizing heroin, meth. Some of the behaviors are extreme. Do you have any fear of safety to our community members?
I don't have any more fear than I do right now. I can tell you, as somebody who has been involved in the justice system because of substances, that whenever I was in a space and a place where I could get the help that I needed without being judged, because that is the biggest obstacle for anyone that is leaving the criminal justice system, how they can maintain on the outside without going back to the same populations and the same experiences that they were involved in before, because that's the population that they know and that's where they're accepted. They face judgment during job interviews. People face judgment with various members of the just the communities in general, right? It is a cultural perception that people are inherently bad. And once you use a substance, you're always going to use a substance. But it's not like that. It's not like that for people who are overweight because of the chemicals that are in our food and they have reactions to that, or they have mental health problems that they are struggling to cope with. So ineffective coping mechanisms, right? that cause them that they use anyways, they believe help, or they believe are a reason for them to overeat. Then there's the opposite end of that spectrum, people who make themselves throw up to void of any food that they have eaten because of addictions to those kinds of behaviors. Something makes them feel better, and so they do it. We don't incarcerate people for self-harm, for cutting. And it's the same kind of concept. They use these behaviors manifest because of what's going on underneath, right? We're not going to criminalize a person who's obese because they can't stop eating a bag of potato chips. We're not going to make it a criminal behavior to buy certain foods that contribute to that. Well, that's exactly what's happened here, just on a different perspective. We see it differently, and we say, oh, well, it's a moral behavior. Drug use is immoral. Well, that is even subjective. Drug use is a reality. And if we accept that it is a reality and we work towards changing that, in recovery, we have to accept those parts and things about us that we dislike the most, because it's when it's in the throes of our deepest struggles that when we reject ourselves, we reject any part of ourselves, we stay stuck in that cycle. And part of the reason why we stay stuck in that cycle and reject the very fiber of who we are is because we feel judged because of our choices. We feel judged by other people all the time. We are told from a very young age, this is right, this is wrong, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. And I'm not supportive of just like a free-for-all world where you do what you want to do as long as it doesn't impact me, we're fine. You mentioned criminal behavior that often is a result. So I'm going to go back to the statement that if it gets to that point, yes, you're going to suffer the consequences for going and robbing somebody. You're going to suffer the consequences. You're going to experience, I don't even like the word suffer. You're going to experience the consequences and live through the consequences of whatever your action is. But you're also going to have the opportunity to address the behavior, address the thoughts, address the perception, the perspective that is facilitating the presentation of those behaviors, because the behaviors are the symptoms, right? As long as we keep addressing the symptom, we criminalize the symptom, we are going to continue on the same path that we're on. And it's not been effective in solving any problems.
Well, one of my last fears is, and you may not be a fear, is probably if I'm visiting with you, it's more of a want. You mentioned revenue from the sales, less stress on law enforcement and the courts, that type of thing. So this could move toward legalized drugs, not decriminalized, legalized. And again, this movement, I believe, the next step after decriminalization, legalizing, will really open the door to more and more curiosity, people trying it. But then this type of substance is so much more addictive, and the different effects on people, it really scares me, what can happen to our society with having, the first step of not a crime, decriminalizing, and then could possibly lead to legalization, cities, counties, states seeing a possibility of more revenue, just a thing I'm cautious of.
I mentioned this earlier, I'm going to go back to it. Portugal, they had the highest levels per capita of drug use, overdose, drug-related illness, the experience of it, and the spread, HIV, Hep C specifically, right? Within 5 years of changing their perspective and they decriminalized, they are now the lowest per capita, right? The lowest levels in the world. They went from the highest to the lowest. to me, this is in support of the physics idea, the physics theory that states for every action or force in nature, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So this is the equal and opposite reaction, right? This is through acceptance and providing support and education on healthier behaviors and healthier living and support through our struggles, rather than rejecting and pushing away and criminalizing and keeping it under, that's, you don't talk about that in public. You don't talk about that. You don't go and seek help for that. You're a criminal. You're a bad person, no matter what it is you're using, right? It's that perception. It's that public perspective. And when other countries, Portugal's not the only one. And you know what? Oregon, the state of Oregon in the United States, February 1st, their Measure 110, I believe it's what it's called. They decriminalize drugs for personal possession and personal use, right? So they are already, in just a matter of months, seeing positive results. Less drug overdoses, less involvement with child and family services for children being taken out of homes. Families are standing together. They're seeking the help. They're using the revenue that would have been diverted over to the jail system and the revenue generated by marijuana sales, legal marijuana sales, to implement and fund and support these programs. That the very goal, the very idea is, let's heal together, instead of continuing to separate and judge and label, because we've been doing that for decades and it's not working. In just a couple of months, they're seeing positive improvement. To me, that speaks volumes.
Well, thank you for this talk today. You and I both have our different opinions, and dealing with the changes that'll happen, which there will already be changes in our country, in our state, in our counties, in our towns and cities. We will work together with these changes, and we will support our peers. Our communities will deal with these step by, individually, how things take place within each community.
Absolutely.
So this has been a great talk. I thank you for this today, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brent. And once again, I just want to remind our listeners that the views expressed here don't necessarily represent the views of Brent and I specifically. They definitely are not official views of Montana's Peer Network, other Montana Peer Network staff or affiliates. We are providing these controversial conversations to facilitate thought and healthy discussion on these topics, as we are in a very transformational phase in our world, in our culture, in our society. Things are changing, and there is some fear behind a lot of it. But, to me, it's exciting to see. It's exciting, the possibilities that could be there, regardless of what we're talking about. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Brent, for having this conversation with me.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everyone.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works, recovery is possible.
Recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery is possible.